And then let's enjoy the conversation. Okay, so we officially call the order. Okay with everyone? Fantastic. Well, good evening, everyone. So I'd like you to take up a good production, please.
Of course, Chair. So just a reminder, tonight's meeting is held in a hybrid format. It is being recorded, and I know that we do have some members. With us. So we're going to start with introductions like we always do, but I want to start. Some of you may have met Elizabeth Edwards, our new Chief of Staff. I'm going to turn it over to her. She can introduce herself in a second. It's week 4. Week 4.
Still here.
Still here, which is awesome. We're really enjoying quickly getting to know Elizabeth and work with her. She's drinking from the fire already. Involved with a lot of things all over the organization. So she's hit the ground running. Opportunity for yourself to introduce yourself. They probably read about you. You're actually a real person.
I'm a real girl. So good evening, everybody. Elizabeth Edwards, she, her pronouns. I am the new Chief of Staff, big shoes, but also trying to find my own way here in August lessons. My background is largely in government. I've worked for federal government, state, city, a little bit of time at a county, and my training is as an attorney. But my true love is because I feel like that is the level where we get to actually make a difference at the end of the day. So I keep coming back, and I'm extremely excited to be here at CWAC. So I live in the district, and I'm really passionate about this work. Learning more about it. One of the things that my predecessor told me was that he got to learn every day that he was on the job. He was in the role for many years, so that's really exciting to me too. Thrilled to be with you all this evening. I won't take up any more time. I'm very excited to have some one-on-one conversations and meet you all, and I will be supporting you in CWAC. Huge thanks to Joe for being a steward and caretaker. Yeah.
But the ball will now be yours.
Yes, so I'm going to watch, listen, and learn this evening, and we'll be in a more active role in future meetings.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. So as we normally do, let's start with our committee members. Chair, if you want to start.
Good evening, Alex Span, representing District 1.
Mayor Quinlan, Diane, Tenny Dennis, Water Streets.
Stupid. Gwen Fee, Environment 1. Terry Song, District 3.
Elaine Stewart, Environment 2. Ashley Farrell, Business Rep 2.
Matt Wellner, Builder Developer Rep 2.
Nisha George, at large Rep.
Andy Haugen, District 4.
We go online, or do we say those to the end?
Yes, please. We do have a spread around.
Hey, Joe, it's Mark Farrow, Builder Developer Representative.
Welcome, Mark. And let's now go with CWS staff, and I'll start to the right.
I'm Jody Newcomer. Okay.
Joe Gall, Chief Utility Relations Office for the district. Let's go back.
Just Ellen,
Jared Gare.
Brady Sotfeld, Assistant.
Scott Mansell, Principal Engineer in our
And
Logan Almost, Chief Utility Operations Officer.
Katie Rags. Joe. You're the Government Relations Manager.
Joshua Bernier, Senior Information Technology Technician. Thank you, everyone. Stephanie, is there anyone else? Virtual?
In the room tonight, but no one on.
Dale, please give it to your Washington County Citizen Action Hub. Welcome, Dale. Okay, I think we are done with introductions. Anyone else on the list? I think it's back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Joe. This is time the advisory We have reviewed and accepted the summary of the April 10th, 2024 meeting. Tom, moving on from that, I'd like to invite Tracy to lead the Scoggins Dam project.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to be back again, providing an update on Scoggins Dam. This topic may be familiar to a number of you. It might be new to some of you. There's a pretty extensive history that comes with the discussion around this project in particular. So, but there's also been a lot of updates. This is an item that I've touched on previously during the legislative update that I provided back in April. We talked a little bit about our advocacy efforts associated with Scoggins Dam. We're going to spend a little bit of time tonight talking about the project itself, where things stand, the history of this project, just to give a little deeper dive for everyone. Where do I need to point it, Stephanie? Yeah, Stephanie's going to take over, I think, of that. Already failed on the slide advancing. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk through an overview of the Tualatin project, which includes both Scoggins Dam and Hag Lake. Talk a little bit about the history of what's known as the joint project, and then talk about what is the Safety of Dams project that is currently underway right now, and some really exciting updates in that space. And then talk about, again, our policy and advocacy work in this area. And next slide, please. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of, as Diane knows, a lot of work kind of diving into the history of things with the organization, with the Unified Sewerage Agency, which is, of course, now Clean Water Services. And part of that research has been around Scoggins Dam. And during the time that we, as the county, were looking at potentially creating Unified Sewerage Agency, is happening concurrently at the time that there was a lot of work around building this particular facility. So in 1966, the project, which is known as Tualatin Project, was authorized by Congress. At the time that it was authorized, it included a variety of project purposes. So irrigation, municipal and industrial water for drinking water, flood control, recreation, and conservation of fish and wildlife resources. It wasn't until March of 1969, however, that water quality was included as a project purpose. So that kind of goes along with our kind of concurrent path where we were looking and just in that process really of becoming formed as a new unified sewerage agency in the county. So lucky for us, this was underway. The project was already in the works. The construction of the facility, Scoggins Dam, was complete in 1975. There are a number of local repayment partners that are known as kind of the reimbursable project purposes. So reimbursable meaning that those are obligations financially that are local as opposed to non-reimbursable obligations, which would be federal costs associated with when they were building this facility initially. The local repayment partners include Felton Valley Irrigation District, the cities of Beaverton, Hillsborough, and Forest Grove, and Clean Water Services, which again, of course, at the time was Unified Sewerage Agency. There are a couple of other local repayment partners like Oswego, Water Corporation was one of those, as well as I learned the Tigard Water District at the time has a contract that obviously is no longer in place. So when we talk about the Tualatin project, we're talking about more than just Scoggins Dam. We're talking about Hag Lake and a lot of the infrastructure and facilities that surround that project. So there's a lot of roads associated, pipe lateral distribution system, pump stations, et cetera. So that is what's known as the Tualatin project. Next slide, please. So in terms of the stored water behind the dam, really to kind of break it down very simply, is about 54,000 acre feet of water. About a quarter of that is for drinking water purposes. Again, serving the cities of Forest Grove, Beaverton, and Hillsborough. About half of that water is held for irrigation purposes, so through Felton Valley Irrigation District. And then the other 25% is for water quality releases that we manage. The facility provides really important, as we know, flood control benefits for a 50-year storm event, and obviously a lot of economic benefits as well and jobs created through the existence of this facility, including the M&I, which is municipal and industrial water, so obviously serving a lot of the businesses in the county. Next slide, please. So when I feel like when I talk about this project, sometimes I get the, is anything happening? Because you've been talking about this for 20, 30 years now. And yes, things are really happening now, but there's been a lot of work that has happened over the last several decades, if not more, around this project and looking as a region at what the next kind of increment of significant water supply would be for the region. And really that work began in early 2000s with some water feasibility studies that were done, again, jointly with the partners in the region to look at the next increment of water supply to serve the region. And at that time, it was identified that the expansion of the facility was a potential that would be explored. Work was done to advance that potential. And in 2000, right around 2008, 2009, the Bureau of Reclamation, who owns this facility, and I probably should have noted that earlier, they were doing some seismic work at a number of their facilities, including Scoggins Dam. And at that time, in 2008, they evaluated the seismic risks for this facility, and we're learning a lot more about the Cascadia subduction zone and the potential impact that would have on this facility. It's important to note this is a 151-foot earthen dam, so mainly earthen materials. And not surprisingly, they found that the dam was significantly at risk for vulnerabilities during an earthquake event. So strong potential that the dam itself would fail in an earthquake. In 2012, they issued a corrective action study, and that listed the dam as one of the most seismically threatened facilities in the Bureau of Reclamation's inventory of about 400 plus dams. At that point, the project itself moved into what is known as the Dam Safety Program, Safety of Dams Program. And that's kind of a different kind of section of the Bureau of Reclamation, and kind of to set this project really looking at the need for seismic upgrades to the facility in a very separate kind of program than where it would have otherwise been. All of this is happening again concurrently to ongoing conversations about potentially expanding the facility still. So in 2015, 2016, partners in the region, Clean Water Services being one of the main partners in that effort, we worked to get congressional authorization for what's known as Joint Project Authority. So working with our delegation really closely to have the authority to have Bureau of Reclamation pursue this project as a dam safety project, while still pursuing the potential for expanded storage at that facility. So when we talk about a joint project, that is what that means, is that it would be achieving those two purposes, which is dam safety and addressing those vulnerabilities, as well as still pursuing expanded storage. In 2020, there was joint project feasibility design work that was done, looked at raising the dam, pursuing just the dam safety fix to the existing dam only without expanded storage, and then a downstream dam option. So if you've gone up to this facility, there's an area where it really narrows in, and they would have put an additional dam facility there that would have expanded that storage. Next slide, please. So again, that work and those design options were presented around 2020. In 2021, Clean Water Services made the decision to not pursue the expanded storage option. Really, public safety was a primary factor in that decision and protecting our region's primary water supply source. Other factors that went into that decision were cost, not surprisingly. The estimated cost for the dam were about $750 million for the dam safety project only. This was in about 2019 dollars. And over $1 billion for expanded storage options. With the dam safety program, there's an 85%, 15% cost share. So 85% being on federal government, 15% would be the local cost share that would be split among the variety of repayment partners, including Clean Water Services, drinking water, and irrigation. So for expanded storage project, anything that was above that dam safety general cost would be something that Clean Water Services would be paying for. So then we had some cost estimates that were coming in that were really high. And then at the same time, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 passed. So that was in the fall of 2021. And through that investment, there were additional dollars that went into the dam safety program. So again, as all these conversations and considerations were ongoing and trying to figure out what was the best path forward for this facility, there was not a lot of money going into that program. So things were moving very slowly. The Bureau of Reclamation had a prioritized list of dams that they were able to work on, providing seismic upgrades to various facilities. We were high on the list. We were not the highest on the list. And so knowing there was a lack of resources, nothing was moving particularly quickly, but with that investment and that surge of additional money into the dam safety program, Bureau of Reclamation let us know that they could accelerate the dam safety only project. So the final factor, and Diane may be able to want to expand a little bit on this, is we are really using this stored water primarily for compliance with temperature under the Clean Water Act. Long ago, there was other pollutants that we were using stored water to manage for, but primarily now it's temperature. And we had some additional data and modeling that was done in, I think, right around 2020, that showed us that that additional stored water was not going to gain us the benefit in achieving thermal compliance into the future that we needed, and especially for the investment that it would require. So in that strategy, it was really clear that we need to focus on expanding reuse, additional riparian shading, and then potential of looking at optimizing some of our operations. I don't know if Diane, you want to add anything to that?
Existing dam regulates really well for the watershed itself. So by putting in a downstream dam, we would have issues filling it. So that was one issue. The downstream dam also created more and it created water issues. So we decided at the time, because it wasn't going to solve problems, we would still have to not only invest in a downstream dam, but have these issues, we would also have to still invest in all of it. So it just didn't make sense. Plus, there is a lumber mill that would have to be relocated. So it was a great idea to explore with Bureau. Could that strategy?
Again, you mentioned, because the dam is built with mostly earthen materials and therefore higher, let's say, risk through and with the safety, improvements. Do we know how much lower risk there is in
Yeah, well, and we'll jump into that in a little more detail. But yeah, the facility should be able to withstand a Cascadia subduction dome event when construction is complete. So that is the goal, and the design work is underway that would achieve that goal. Next slide, please. So the project is now a federal project. So there is no more joint project. When they talked about there being that congressional authority in 2015 to have a joint project, that project is no more. This is now just a federal dam safety project. And so that really changes our role as an agency in terms of the interactions that we have, including things like public engagement. We were doing a lot of the work that was associated with public outreach, public education and engagement around potential project. And so that all shifts now to a federal responsibility. The other repayment partners are also joining with Clean Water Services as cooperating agencies. So we've signed agreements with the Bureau of Reclamation because we are repayment partners and we ultimately will still be paying for 15% of this project, that we do have opportunities to be involved through the process. But again, it is much far removed from where we were as a joint project relationship. Cost updates. So we talked about those numbers that were 2019, 2020 numbers. The most recent update that we've seen in fiscal year 2024, so the president's budget that came out in 24, was $900 million for the dam safety only project. So we went from about 750 million to 900 million, and we are still a ways out from construction starting and being complete. So I was listening in, and I know some of our other staff were listening into some of the public meetings that Bureau of Reclamation had recently, and they were asked about the cost, and one of the numbers that was thrown out was a 1.5 billion number in one of those hearings. So we'll see where that ultimate price tag lands, but something that we're watching very closely. In terms of the construction timeline, they're working right now to complete the environmental impact statement. That should be done in 2024. And so they are moving along in that process and have been doing that work now for well over a year. The project design, final design is supposed to be complete in 2027, 2028, with construction starting in 2029 and hopefully construction complete in 2035 if all goes according to plan. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, they are underway of completing the environmental impact statement. A lot of the compliance work has been complete on that. They did just open up for public comment back in January, so there was notice provided in the Federal Register, and they've held a number of public scoping meetings talking about things like the borrow areas and where they're going to get all of this material, because they're essentially they're not taking out the current dam. They're basically reinforcing that dam with a dam that's going to be immediately in front of that dam. So it's going to be a lot of material. They do have land that surrounds Hag Lake, so they feel like they have adequate borrow sites to get the dirt that they'll need as that fill material. So a lot of plans about how they're going to move that fill material, different roads that they will need to build as part of that, and looking at a variety of options. So that's where they've been looking for public comment. Clean Water Services provided public comment, as did the other cooperating agencies, and they've solicited public feedback through those processes and meetings as well. The other issue I want to mention is that they are currently working right now to update what is known as the economic benefit and repayment analysis. So they had issued this draft analysis in 2020, and really it's about determining in that 15% local share how much each of the repayment partners will be responsible for. It is not based off of the quantity of water that we all use. They are using different economic assumptions and methodologies to calculate the value of the stored water. And so they are going to be updating that analysis. It has a shelf life of 5 years. So their goal is to update those numbers, but to not do it so early as to kind of miss that window of construction starting in 2029. So they need it to last 5 years in order to have an analysis that's still valid and not have to redo the whole thing before that construction starts. So I'll get into a little bit of what that 2020 analysis said in terms of how much each of the local repayment partners would be paying. So next slide, please. Yes.
For the borrows, so it's, I know in the prior designs we looked at, there was concern over the amount of aggregate we were gonna need for those designs, because we have a pretty different resource here regionally. Is the new design expected to be far less in the way of rock, or?
It's still a lot of material,
So is the
but
fill gonna be earthen berms, or is it gonna be aggregate?
that's a great question. We may need to ask and consult with Mac on that, but
Yes, they're looking for a borrowed bed of aggregate as well as the native materials. Can we go back to the drawing that you have? So they're gonna build a big shear case, so that's the way, right, to hold it, and then they have a stability berm that's aggregate. Just gonna pop it.
Will it be a private? So I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of we already have a very limited aggregate supply for the work that we do around the region. How much might this affect that market too?
That's a great question, because it is a lot of aggregate. So
It
that's,
doesn't have to be real great aggregate though, right? You can dump stuff with spoils in it and everything else. It's not gonna take away from the real green stuff. Yeah, so that's what I read about. Still a lot of trucking.
yeah.
I mean, there's not very many resources. But the brown spot, that's the new part, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then everything from that jagged will be removed, is that correct?
They would filter and do drain, the shear key, the waste fill, the stability of the berm. And they do have some native fill, I think they're gonna continue to work on. So they have to stabilize the toe of the dam with a shear key.
Now, are they going to, what's a shear key? Explain that.
So it's sort of like a lock. So they put a lock in, and I know Terry would love to talk about this, right? So it's like a big lock, sort of holds the weight of the dam. So when it shakes like a bowl full of jelly, what would likely happen is it would slump, but it wouldn't fail. That's the goal.
And what's the material?
That's concrete. Yeah, but it weighs.
Is a big pipe coming out, does that take for the drinking water in the dam?
So they must spillway. They must spillway. I don't know if they were putting the.
We live in walls.
Yeah. That's why some of the drinking water. that goes back here.
No, so it's really the drinking water folks are really managed it from what they have in Head Lake. With what they're bringing in on the. Yeah, it's not gonna.
Is anyone's private property being affected by this or?
There must, I don't think there's a lot of change because the water surface elevation really isn't changing. There's gonna be a lot, the dam's gonna be higher because they need to make sure there's enough freeboard on it. But I didn't see a huge acquisition requirement for this. It does impact the park, so they're gonna be doing some park amenity changes, but the impacting the community, I didn't see a lot of acquisition.
No, that's,
Screens. They screen the soil, they don't want to dump a bunch of real stuff on here, right? They want clay, I would imagine, huh? So they're gonna have to mine clay. Yes. Who's the chief engineer?
So you're up. So
yeah, Hero.
You're up, so.
yeah, it's fascinating read. You look through what they're reading.
So in their borrow areas, and maybe I just need to look at the draft EIS, but are they gonna revegetate that or?
Yeah, they do. They open it. They have all that from that. But that's something, you know, folks will want to read and provide comment. Yeah. Because it is significant. The river keepers are really great at providing input in the last fall around.
Stephanie, if you can advance, okay. So we were talking about the economic repayment analysis that they'll be revisiting here in 2024. And we're already having some conversations with the Bureau of Reclamation to update some of the data that they used in their prior analysis and the assumptions that went into that. So again, these are what are known as reimbursable costs that are shared amongst the repayment partners. And they're based on net economic benefits. So again, not the quantity of water that's being utilized. So they're really trying to capture a value of what is, for instance, the value of water quality. So it's an interesting document. I shared it with Elizabeth recently, and it is really the methodology that they utilized through a benefits transfer approach to look at capturing the value of water quality. For clean water services, they looked at that as a per household assumption, per household basis, for people to have improved water quality if they live within a certain proximity of a river. So it was really a very unique type of approach looking at water quality, I think, especially in light of us being a sanitary sewer provider and having an NPDES, permit that's associated with Clean Water Act of pollutants that we have to managed for. So didn't really reflect necessarily that aspect of water quality as we think about it. And it was a little bit more of a broad sense of water quality within the region and basin. So you'll see the cost allocation by user. Again, this is the 2020 draft analysis that will be updated. But it did result in clean water services having about half of the local share cost allocated to water quality. So irrigation be 27 million in this, I should note that it is at least my understanding that with irrigation, that the federal government does provide for irrigation assistance. So when the dam was built, and this is part of my looking at the history of things very recently, that there is likely to be irrigation assistance from the federal government that kicks in that would reduce down their amount. Usually that comes from some of the community power revenues that Bureau of Reclamation is able to generate, and they're able to take that and reduce that down from that account. So I would imagine, but don't quote me, I don't know for sure what they're looking at in terms of irrigation assistance, but that 27 million amount would go down potentially for irrigation, because that is pretty significant for them. Drinking water, so the M&I side, they've got that listed as Joint Water Commission in this particular report, is at 30 million. And then again, water quality being close to $54 million of that overall 15% share, which with the 2020 numbers would have been 112 million as that 15%. And so with the project costs potentially growing, we expect those costs are going to grow as well. So yes, next slide, please.
The original allocation, the cost per acre for the water is shared evenly. So if you look at these numbers and the amount of water that Clean Water Services has as compared to other users, paying twice, nearly twice the amount for the same road. So it's something we're going to ask at the end of all of it. Because their belief system is that sewer users are willing to pay more for the water, for water quality. So that's something we're going to get feedback from all of you on.
So it's going to come.
This comes from ratepayers. So
Next.
they will be. It's fun to think about. So I have to say, I fell on it.
Yeah.
So, but it's something to think about. Do we actually, for water quality purposes, value water twice as much?
Let's make a public referendum.
No, it's their decision. So Tracy will talk about the influence.
Yes, next slide, please. So we have been meeting with Bureau of Reclamation, and they have a new economist that has come on. The prior economist left for a different job. So we have a new economist. We met with him in fall of 2023. Had a really good introductory conversation. He was very new to the project, very new to getting to know all of the various local partners in the region. And the economist is now working to update the methodologies that are used to determine that local cost share allocation. One thing that was very clear in the analysis and question that we've had is that in the past, when the dam was constructed back in 1975, and when you look at the project authorized purposes, conservation of fish and wildlife benefits is its own project purpose. In the 2020 repayment analysis, there's about maybe it's one or two, maybe two sentences about fish and wildlife benefits, and it says it is captured through water quality and it's captured through recreation. And so there was no benefit that was assigned to fish and wildlife as part of the analysis, and it was assumed to have been taken care of under the water quality analysis. And so that's kind of one piece that stuck out to us. Because the fish and wildlife benefit would be a federal obligation, that is a non-reimbursable expense as opposed to reimbursable. So having that kind of folded in under our water quality value to us was something that we wanted to talk about and understand better from Bureau of Reclamation. And so we are continuing those discussions, and we'll be engaging with Bureau of Reclamation. Actually, we will be heading to Boise later this month to have those continued discussions and try and understand kind of where they were approaching some of the assumptions through that prior analysis and how they're going to be doing those going forward. And I think the other piece I'll just mention is in reading the analysis, to me, it sounds a lot like they're capturing water quality as a broader concept as opposed to something that is connected again to a Clean Water Act permit. So again, capturing the general value of what is water quality and what are people willing to pay for it. In the analysis, it doesn't talk about things like riparian shading and what that does for water quality and offsetting that. It almost looks to me, when I read this, as though stored water is the only compliance pathway that we have towards meeting certain water quality objectives, including those within our permit. So that's a conversation we'll be having with Bureau of Reclamation in a couple of weeks. And hopefully there'll be some good dialogue and willingness to dive a little bit deeper into those questions. Next slide, please. Okay, to the questions. So, because I know that we're getting close to time. So we have two questions. We already kind of started down the path of those, but that's okay. What do CWAC members think about the 2020 repayment analysis and specifically that cost share for clean water services? Now, again, for us, we always love to say, yes, we believe in the benefits of water quality, absolutely. But again, I think a little surprised to see it valued at 2 times that of some of the consumptive water uses. And then whether or not we should pursue opportunities to reduce down the portion of that cost share through Bureau of Reclamation or through our federal delegation. I want to note that because this is 15% of the total project cost, and because the Bureau of Reclamation is looking at our proportionate share of that 15%, the challenge is that reducing our portion down, just based off of the methodologies, would have the effect of increasing the amounts for drinking water or for irrigation. And so it's a really challenging conversation to have in the region because we are not looking to push additional cost onto our partners. We are concerned, though, again, about the precedent of the water quality water being valued as the most expensive water, what that means in terms of climate change, and that it's now the most expensive thing to keep water in a river. And so we've got a variety of concerns where what we're hoping to be able to do in those conversations is talk about areas and impacts and benefits that are national in scope. In the national scope, those are the broader water quality benefits, those fish benefits that shouldn't be attributed to one particular local partner, including Clean Water Services, but that should be covered by the federal government as part of their obligations for the variety of kind of areas that they work in, including fish and wildlife, as an example. So yes, I'll open it up to those two very, very big questions. Yes.
Have you had conversations with ODFW about listed and fish species in the river and the value of that water? Because, yeah, I mean, this is the Northwest and we have listed salmonids.
Yes, we do. And we are working with an economist that we are contracting with to try and capture the value of fish, because again, it wasn't captured in that prior analysis. And so when we say, you know, we believe that we're paying that fish obligation entirely as Clean Water Services, we want to know what that number is and be able to point to something. So we have connected with ODFW, and then our economist has done, this is kind of her area of expertise, so it's doing really good.
There's multiple, you know, because it's not just the fish, there's recreation associated with fish. There are dollars that flow into local economies when people come to fish, so.
Yeah, yes, and the recreation value was captured. So that's, you know, in the analysis, there is a non-reimbursable amount that is associated with recreation. Again, I don't know that we think that was
Is that traveling around on Hag Lake? Because that's not the same.
That is not the same. Yeah, and the economist has some notes about where they see there's deficiencies in that recreation value as well, which again would be a federal non-reimbursable kind of component of the overall cost. So yeah, we're looking at that piece as well.
I guess is there a precedent that other projects where they've done taken a similar approach for a cost share?
So one of the challenges is that it's our understanding that this is the only Bureau of Reclamation facility that has water quality as a project purpose. And so the good news and the bad news of that is that anything we do in this space will set a precedent that will cause them heartburn. But at the same time, there's really no precedence for how to deal with water quality, which I think is where we're seeing that some of the assumptions that were used in that analysis, to us don't seem to make sense for our particular mission as clean water services. So they were lacking, I think, in precedent of how to approach this. But again, I think we're looking to, the next 50 or more years, and that this is now a study that exists. Part of what they did to generate these values was look at different studies from across the country of water quality, things like converting septic systems in the Midwest and how that would impact lake water quality, which again is very different than river water quality. And so we now know that this study will be something that will be utilized and inform future projects, even beyond Bureau of Reclamation.
So if I'm to understand the second question, if you pursue opportunities to reduce it through reclamation, that's what would push it off the other partners. Through the federal delegation, it's more likely that that tactic would be to get them to have federal shares be higher. Is that correct? Is that correct, or am I?
We are pursuing in the conversations with reclamation, again, wanting to make sure that the analysis is accurate and the data that's captured and reflected is accurate. So that is one piece of it. But again, I think those areas that we are flagging for them are areas where we think that they have looked at water quality beyond what is the water quality that we are obligated to protect through our permits. And so saying that, yes, you can capture a value for broader water quality, but that should be national in scope. So we are, they have their directives and standards at Bureau of Reclamation. That they are subject to. And so I think we need to have that conversation with them and see if there's any willingness to shift on their part to that federal side of the ledger. Who knows, maybe, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that. And then at that point, I think would be appropriate for us to start engaging in conversations with the federal delegation.
It is really startling to me to see that Clean Water Services is pulling 25% of the water, and the analysis shows responsible for 50%. And you look at the flip side, irrigation uses are 50% of the water and 25% of the cost. And I don't want to make anything harder on any of the partners any more than anybody else in this room does. But if there are some remedies available for irrigation relief for those costs, it could be really worth pursuing, I would think. So, just my 2 cents is let's push back if we can.
I would agree. Politics. It sounds like you could be thrust into a position where you're not a problem. You're going to go to your ratepayers and say, hey, we want to take care of this water. Here's how much it's going to be. It's a pretty esoteric ask for a lot of people.
And I think saying what you're saying, above and beyond that, I would worry about it turning ratepayers against some conservation efforts.
So that's where I'm going with this.
That is a huge risk.
And it's not like there's any choice either, though. The water has to get into the river to meet thermal needs as is. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Clean Water Services really has a viable option to walk away from the Hag Lake releases.
Correct.
Yeah, you need that water.
But should it cost twice as much for that water? That's a fundamental question.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair?
Is, other partners, are they expecting to have to raise rates to the as a result? In this project? Yes, yeah, I mean, all of this would be either the patrons of the irrigation district to pay over a period of 50 years, with no interest on the irrigation side as well, though. They have no interest deal with Bureau of Reclamation. But yeah, then obviously, and that's one of the considerations too, is if you push things onto the drinking, many of those are the exact same ratepayers. So ratepayers are getting hit with this number twice. And they're not probably going to care which side is higher, other than that they're paying a bill for this ultimately. And so that's a conversation again with Bureau of Reclamation, is we're very aware of that dynamic, which is if you really look at this as a combined cost for drinking water and for water quality, it really is a significant lift for the region and that will be paying that over a period of 30 or so years.
Irrigation districts are the biggest hit, probably. Maybe ours is the biggest number, but for who their clientele are, they would be taking the biggest hit.
Oh, I don't, yeah, I'll look at Diane in that, because I know what you're saying in that. And so, yes, they do not have a lot of patrons. And so, and that's again where the unknown here, and I don't know if Reclamation will share or enlighten us with this, is how much irrigation assistance may be on the table to help bring that number down for them, and what would that look like ultimately. And that's the big unknown. And so that's not something that I would expect we'd have complete certainty around until some of the contracts are kind of underway with the federal government. So yeah, so it really makes it hard to know how much of a impact that's going to be to the district.
So they do have a component of capacity to pay. So if they can't pay, the federal government secures that for them. Whereas the drinking water and wastewater, we don't have that same benefit.
How are you planning to educate people about like the cost share or the price? Because I think that would make a big difference in what people thought of it too. And unless they just see it, as opposed to just seeing it on their bill. Is there any plan for that?
That's a very good question.
It's a tough bill.
Because whatever we do, it needs to be a joint conversation with drinking water. Water irrigation. We've always spoken as one group. So this is the first time when that study came out, and it was great. I trust them. So Tracy has been working well to talk to our water partners, the irrigators. It's a bit of an issue right now. And one of the questions with the federal government is the water sources that money looking at small alternatives. Would there be something that they would offset? So even though they would charge us more, there's something that would be offset. But again, it's sort of a delicate conversation. We haven't gotten any feedback on whether that's something to do. So, but it's a big shot. $53 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, and at the same time, I don't want to lose sight of the importance, again, of this project, right? This is currently the region's primary water supply source. So the vulnerability of it is something that I think about regularly, and making sure that we've secured that water supply source. It certainly will be a message that we are sharing with the public. Again, with whatever number it is that we are having to sell to the public, hopefully, yeah, again, that public safety component and just protecting that water supply source is going to be, a message that we want to make sure is very clear. This project is hugely important. We're really, really happy to see that it's moving along. Because again, when I talk about this law, people go, well, we've been talking about that for 20 or more years and nothing happens. Well, we are actually now looking at construction starting on this project, and it should be starting in the next 5 or so years. So that's the good news and good news takeaway, I guess, of this presentation. But
It's a condition precedent. This is not a condition precedent, right?
I mean, we would be the first. So this type of study that the allocation of the costs, we are the first.
But it's not going to stop the project if you can't agree on it.
No, they'll just.
Yeah.
just not to put too fine a point on this, or maybe too blunt a point, but Fish and Wildlife Service and federal agencies do have responsibility for recovery of listed species. So I think there should also be opportunity for leverage to federalize some of that as well. So I know you're already thinking about working on that. I just want to endorse.
Yes,
Good idea.
good for you.
Finish is more sewer ratepayers' responsibility. So by putting fish on top of cleaners, this seems unfair.
I was just wondering, what is the timeline that is expected for this remedy for the dam to hold? Like when is the next big construction project expected? Or like, what is the lifetime of this fix? When will we have to do this again?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure. I might need to get back to you on that one. I mean, this is a generational project. I mean, this should last a very long time, but I don't know. I can answer that. We didn't know about the Cascadia subduction zone, so there is that,
I think that's part of like the education process of like, this is kind of like a levy or a bond in some ways,
Yeah.
So we're doing this and this is going to last for X number.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, is it like an every 2 years kind of thing, but it also isn't.
I think that's a helpful message for the public. And
I don't think they'll have to make another investment unless an earthquake happens, and then they'll have to see, it's not, it needs to be agreed on it. So this is all long, 50 or plus. And they can spend money to do maintenance. They don't anticipate a large project. They believe this will keep us secure for the inspection. The person that would everyone.
I know we don't make a lot of motions, but we also don't get asked a lot of questions like this, so. Yes, at risk of being presumptive, I would move for bullet number 2 that we should pursue opportunities to reduce CWS's portion of the cost share through reclamation of our federal delegation.
Motion on the floor.
Second.
Second. All for discussion. Let's just say it sounded like there is no opt out for. So I think that more education needs to be done to prepare them for this, because, even looking at this last cycle of elections, right, the Zoom on there passed. People are very sensitive right now to any so I think you see the rest we had. And this has been 20 years of the work since we kept our rates lower in comparison to the other. I think that will come to carrying that and seeking out, ways to move that more to the federal side.
And we've been planning ahead for this. So we've been saving money on that when this repayment happened. Appreciate what that annualized cost would be. So we've been very good squirrels to be able to address this issue. So we don't anticipate huge rate spikes because of this. We've been planning it. But I wouldn't be generally against it.
Well, and the work to try to, for lack of a better term, federalize more of this is going to benefit more than just clean water services, because Joint Water Commission ratepayers are already going to have to pay for the Willamette water supply. Yeah. And if this goes on top of it, it's, as you were seeing, whoever's bill it is, this is all to the good to try to get Bureau of Rec to kind of tip their hand about what they can really do to help.
Got a motion, we're having discussion, any further discussion? Call for a vote. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
I,
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passed.
We appreciate that and appreciate everyone's thoughts and perspective into this. So it's very helpful. We'll keep you updated as these conversations move along. So thank you all.
You have a 2-minute limit, and Stephanie will be our timekeeper.
Chair Alex, the Clean Water Supervisor Committee, Clean Water Supervisor members, Clean Water staff. I have 2 comments. We're a recommendation in a presentation at the City Council in Forest Pro, we talked about if the dam classes were watering, and they had charts. That my understanding is Clean Water Services has those maps and the fire marshal, forest prevention maps. So they're available. I suggest that everybody in the Clean Water Supervisor get them, because the maps on how the water dam breaks, you know, then it's going to be built in 11 years. So we've got to take a look at what's happening in the dam. So I really recommend that everybody be aware of those maps. The water goes, the forest grow, wastewater treatment plants downstream of that, how quickly we get there, will impacts. Has very good implications. I think everybody should be aware of that. Second one. Willamette water only. My understanding is that big pipe is built, the Willamette River is 1 or 2% increased higher in temperature than the water in the Fall River. So that's a temperature problem that's going to be created when the water is mixed. The other problem with that water is it's more contaminated, more PFAS stuff in it. So it's another concern that needs to be talked about when you combine the water. And data centers, semiconductor industry, big users use a lot of water. That water is being brought mainly because of those big users. So I think it needs to be considered how much they pay for the water. They get lower rates than most people do because they're industrial users. So I suggest, say, please consider those states. Who's better? Anyway, compliance with water is a big deal. Scoggins Dam, water is used for regulation by federal standards of water temperature. And so just, I just say some statements for you to consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Like to do the announcement?
Yeah, I'll be short because I know we're running out of time. We still have a great tour and presentations to get to. So some of you may have seen, maybe all of you, we lost a former member of CWAC, Art Lawrence, who served on CWAC. You may have seen passed away in late May. Art was known for being a leader in the brewery industry here in Oregon, the Oregon Brew Fest, which was a great event that I used to love to go to. He was on this committee at CWAC, and I understand that he was also kind of instrumental in the water review concept that we did in making wastewater. I just learned as well that he was went to Linfield and was on the 1966 national championship team. It sounded like he was a wonderful person. Some of you may have served with Art. And I just wanted to offer our condolences with his passing. So scheduled questions are just to be aware in July 10th is your next meeting. We're planning a meeting at Fernhill out in Forest Grove. Hopefully it'll be nice weather again, more details to come. We will not have an August meeting, take a break. And then we are planning in September to do a barbecue and to get on the river like we normally do with the board sometime in September. So more details about that. Your next kind of regular format meeting won't be really until October, back at 86. So, and those are all the announcements that I have.
Thank you, Joe. I think it's still a fun tour. Gary? Yes.
Oh, we got to talk.
Okay.
Well, that was some pretty heavy stuff, so we're gonna put some oxygen back in the room and just do a fun little quiz. How well do you know water? You're pointing at me. Should I use this? Stand. Oh, I got to stand in front of the camera. This is a pretty dynamic talker. This is going to be very challenging for me. How old is water? We're going to go multiple choice. Have some mercy on some folks. Some of these get a little more challenging. So I'm going to flash up the answer here in a second, but everyone got their answer figured out? 4.6 billion years old. It's all been recycled many times. How much of the Earth's water is fresh? It'll be hard. Oh, 3%. It's not much there. How much of the Earth's fresh water is available for us to use? So of that 3%, much of that 3% is available for us to use. Did anyone have 1%? Okay. Pretty staggering numbers right there. The value of water is very important, and these are to highlight that. How much of the Earth's fresh water is used for agriculture? So of that 1% of the 3%, how much is used for ag? %. When did the Clean Water Act go into effect? We're going to leave you with a softball here. 1972. Best thing that happened to water that humans have done. What is the famous river that triggered the Clean Water Act, that caught on fire? Yep. Yep. Lots of pollution. Okay. Just want to do a little icebreaker there. I am going to chat about our reuse program, which dovetails into so much of what we do here in Clean Water Services and what we believe in. The mission, vision, values, a lot of things connected to the dam. I mean, it's all connected. It's water, right? And I am the reuse program manager, very proud to manage that program. We have a long history here of that program. And it's all based on drivers. Okay. Everything we do here is ultimately tied to our permit. And I think I'm proud to work here at Clean Water Services because as a utility, we don't just hit the easy button and try to pass it on to ratepayers and just come up with mechanical and engineered solutions. We like to combine mechanical engineering with natural solutions and natural treatment of our earth. And I think we do a very eloquent job of that. And the reuse program is a great example of that. Historically, what we've done, but into the future, things we're really proud of. Very innovative, creative when it comes to reuse. When you look at the rest of the country, as far as recycled water goes. And it really fits our mission and vision that Diane has had for us, and Bill Gaffey before, and Gary Kramer before that. I'll run through the bit of the history of the reuse program here. Why reuse now? And some of the innovation approaches we have to our water quality strategy, with compliance with our NPDES permit. And then a lot of the research we're doing, okay? We are really studying this Thomas Dairy, we call it, 23 acres just below the plant here the district bought, and looking at some of the ecological benefits that we can do with recycled water and really just making sure that we're not causing any environmental harm. And we're taking a really deep dive into some of that stuff. And Scott is going to run through a lot of the research, a lot of the data, hopefully generate a lot of questions. And I think we just did a little thing to art, but art is quintessential into moving the needle for our reuse program. The beer thing, was a fantastic way to start a conversation about water. That's the oil of conversation, as we all know. And Art was a fantastic advocate for us. Okay, we have a lot of things we do. We want to facilitate advocacy and have people understand what we do and advocate for what we do. And making beer out of wastewater and having that conversation about water has been on Earth for 4.6 billion years. It's all been recycled. Was a really good way to do it. It's hard for me to go to a recycled water conference now and not have a beer that's been made out of recycled water. There are utilities and breweries all over the country that are using recycled water because they think it's cool. I mean, that was pretty cool. And that all started here with really a bunch of us just sitting around having a beer. Pretty awesome. Art was a great guy. So I'm going to walk you through kind of the why. I mean, a lot of utilities do recycle water. Most of it's inside the fence, right? Irrigation of plants. We use a lot of water for process and things like that. And then we had the first TMDL, it's total maximum daily limit, for discharge to the Tuolumne River of phosphorus. First one in the state of Oregon, 1991. So it was a regulatory strategy. We had this slogan called 0.1 in 91. Okay, 0.1 milligrams per liter of phosphorus coming out of the back of the plant, which at that time seemed daunting. It seemed almost impossible to do that. Okay, we were coming out of the back of the plant with 20, 30 parts. To get down to 0.1 seemed a little like, how are we going to do this? So we had two tacks. We were on two missions. We had this process inside the treatment plant called biological phosphorus removal, which was kind of out there, but it wasn't really honed and wasn't super dialed in here at our treatment facilities. A lot of that work goes on in the aeration basin. It's a biological process. We just weren't sure we were going to get to 0.1, so then we were on this mission to really expand the reuse program. To instead of put that phosphorus load into the river, we're going to expand our irrigation program. And those are going to be the two ways we were going to accomplish the 0.1. The wastewater engineers were really good, and they figured out the biological phosphorus removal process, and they were able to get to 0.1 milligrams per liter in 91 just within that process of biological phosphorus removal inside the treatment plant. So the reuse program had been up and running, was doing really good work. We had 3 golf courses that we were doing around here, Cook Park. Anyone who went to Tiger High School, we've been doing recycled water on their athletic fields for over 30 years now. And though we didn't have a regulatory driver for that, we had customers that were depending on that water, and we did feel ultimately that we were replacing them using potable water or taking water out of the river, and this was a really good thing. So the program was very stable for about 30 years. It wasn't really a driver to expand it. 2013, 2019, the beer idea came up. There was a big movement in our industry about one water. It's one water concept. We have WEF as Water Environment Federation that we partner with, do a lot of research with, and they were really pushing this conversation about water is just water, right? We don't need to label it. It's not irrigation water, it's not wastewater, it's not drinking water, it's all water. We just should talk about the level of treatment that it's been through and its intended use. If you're just intending to put it on lawn and irrigate it, you don't need to take it to drinking water standards. It's a waste. So we just, this idea of being more intentional with our use was a really industry-focused thing and during that time. When 2020 came around, we've had this thermal issue for a long time, right? To Ellen's point, we have salmon that live in Elaine, sorry. We have these salmon that live here and they like cold showers, and we live here and we like warm showers, and we're trying to figure out how we can kind of make this work, right? So we've been doing mitigation for our thermal issues. You know, I come from a long line of consulting in the wetland world where the first thing DSL or Army Corps of Engineers says, what did you do to avoid that impact? Avoidance is, you have to prove that you can't avoid these impacts, okay? So I've always been a big fan of avoidance. Okay, we were really good at mitigation, ag lake water flow, the shade program. We were putting that warm water in the river, and we mitigated for that. You know, I've been talking for years around here about what are we going to do to avoid those impacts? How are we going to do that? I think the reuse program is something we can really consider, because we're not gonna put that heat in the river. Me being a wetland biologist and coming from that background, thought, hey, we've got a lot of degraded wetlands. These urban wetlands, wetlands are three things: certain kind of soil, certain kind of plants, and a hydrology source. We're in these urban environments. A lot of these hydrology sources have been paved, diverted, put into stormwater facilities. When you look at restoring urban wetlands, that hydrology piece, I would say, was probably the most challenging, most difficult to replace. Plants, communities you can manipulate with. Soils are kind of, you got hydrosoils or you don't. It's not much you're going to do about that. But the hydrology piece is something that's very fundamental to restoring wetland function. I'm along the lines of wastewater utilities, particularly clean water services, in a unique position to offer a resource that is appropriate for restoring wetland hydrology, being the recycled water. So this idea of restoring wetland function with irrigation recycled water, growing native plants, using those plants for other restoration sites, this whole sort of fundamental circle of uses and beneficial uses was really interesting to me. We had visions of expanding the REUSE program up to 15 million gallons a day. We do about 1 million gallons a day out of Durham, hot, driest day of the year. That's peak. So when I'm talking numbers, it's a peak. The curve is like this over the season, right? May, June, not a lot of irrigation. We get in, it's starting to pick it up now. Then crops start getting harvested. So the irrigation curve is really kind of peaking July, August. Our most critical time for water is September, when there's not a lot of general irrigation going on. However, wetlands, perfectly adequate place to be putting irrigation water or hydrology water at that time of year. And we're only going to really do this with partnerships. That 15, 5 of it's really for irrigation of our properties, partner properties. 10 of that is vision to trade with the Tuolumne Valley Irrigation District. We put 10 million gallons of water in their pipeline. We trade that for the stored water behind Hag Lake. It would keep more cold water in Hag Lake longer, which would help us in those late months of the summer. Real quick, I thought I'd run through some numbers. I was kind of curious. I went through a bunch of annual reports, looking at volumes. It's pretty consistent numbers there as far as the amount that we put out, the million gallons. That's a total annual amount. The one thing I wanted to really point out, I don't know if this has a pointer. Look at 2014, the dollars. We were selling our recycled water for 6 cents a CCF. That's $80 for a million gallons of water. That didn't cover the cost of chlorine. Those rates were established back in the early 90s. We didn't really think much about it. We did a big rate study in 2014 and said, what are the other customers getting charged for this same quality water in other parts of the country, mostly California? And we kind of landed on this, it should be $1 a CCF. We use CCF unit, that's 100 cubic feet, because that's what the drinking water providers use. So we thought, we need to, it's really to cover the O&M, okay, the operation and maintenance of our reuse system. But we do look at this as an opportunity to offset rates eventually if we start generating a lot of income, certainly help with operation and maintenance, and help with the research that we're doing. So those existing customers, 2014, we went from 6 cents to 20 cents. The next year, 40 cents. We bumped to 20 cents till we got into $1 over a 5-year period. New customers now, we're looking at starting them around $1 as well. We have an escalator on there that's tied to our sewer water rates. We were able to generate a little bit more revenue to cover our costs and help fund research that we're doing at Thomas Terry. Drinking water, I just looked up in Tiger, is about $5 a CCF, just for comparison. So 23, good year, 82 million gallons. We do Class A, which is the highest quality. There's Class A, B, C, and D. A being the highest quality from a treatment perspective. It's pretty much drinking water, but it's got a lot of chlorine in it from a disinfection step at the very end. We have about 200 acres in the program. Just as a WAG, it takes about 200 acres to do 1 million gallons a day. That's sort of an operating number you can kind of play with. We are the largest urban producer of recycled water in Oregon. There's some ag pieces out on the east side of the state that do more. But as far as urban utilities go, Durham, we've been doing it here since 93, 91, 2 was inside the fence. 93, we started delivering to customers. 3 golf courses out of Durham, Tiger High said, Cook Park and the wetlands here, Cook Park, Durham City Park, Durham Elementary. I'll show you a map very quick here. But we just started producing recycled water at Rock Creek. We've done a little ad hoc before in the past, but now we're up and running. We just built the pipeline to the reserve golf course. Again, a partnership with TVID and the Bureau of Rec, where we actually traded giving the reserve golf course recycled water for 400 acre feet of stored water behind Hag Lake. So that was a creative, innovative way to sort of not hurt our partner with TVID. We're compensating them for that revenue that they would have generated, have gotten from the reserve. And we're giving them recycled water, it's helping our thermal load, and we get 400 acre feet of stored water. So it's a really interesting three-way transaction. If we release that water out of the dam, that's when the Bureau gets their payment for the water quality piece. And the objectives of the program, I mean, again, the driver for us, thermal energy out of the river, in-stream water right trading, withdrawals or something we have done. That's the Shangri-La. I think that's probably one of the better things we could do. And of course, since I'm a wetland scientist, I want to really use this for restoring wetlands that I think would really benefit greatly. A plethora of benefits, cost savings. You know, when I talk to potential customers who are using potable water, particularly, I get 2 things. I get to talk to their heart about the environmental benefits of using recycled water, but I also get to talk to the pocketbook. And when you can talk to the pocketbook and the heart, you pretty much have people's attention at that point. And so I've got a real easy platform to sit there and at least have conversations with folks. Here's our existing program out of Durham. Been doing this really since the early 90s, King City Golf Course. We're looking at expanding this line potentially at some of the UGB that's coming into King City. Working with the developers over there. Summerfield, Tuolumne Country Club on the other side of the river, the Thomas Dairy that you see in orange, that's where we'll go take a tour. So that's the existing program that we've done. Here's the program into the future out of Rock Creek. These are district-owned properties that we bought in 1991, 92 to expand the REUS program for the phosphorus issues. We held on to those properties, we leased them out to farmers for the last 30 plus years. We have taken them out of those farm leases and started to restore the plant community there, set the table for restoring them back to wetlands. We were able to purchase these properties because they were, quite frankly, really bad farming areas. They flood every year. They're, you know, along Dairy Creek and the Tuolumne and Jackson Bottom, of course, you know, is a lake in the winter. Davis Tool is a lake in the winter. The other ones are, so they weren't great for farming. So we were able to acquire them and continue leasing them, but now we're sort of swinging them back. I do want to say that we are keeping them in an agricultural setting as far as farming these native plants. We're going to be harvesting seed, we're going to be harvesting plants to go toward other restoration projects that the Natural Systems Enhancement Stewardship Department manages. So really unique opportunity for us to do some really, really interesting things from wildlife benefit, protection, and all sorts of great things. This is the properties in Forest Grove that we own, Ellsbury, Terror Horse. We purchased those. We actually did an in-stream water right transfer on those properties about 10 years ago. And then the Zerker property, you can see the wetland signature in here. That's primarily all jurisdictional wetland as well. So the benefits of doing it for wetland restoration, obviously diverse wetland plant communities, habitat connectivity, increase the wildlife diversity. We've been doing a lot of bird counts and other studies from a wildlife perspective to see sort of the baseline into these projects and how they benefit diversity and richness. We're looking at carbon sequestration, some of the economic activity as far as harvesting and growing these commodities as a form of native plants. Lots of educational opportunities, partnerships. This is an innovative approach. I go all over the country to conferences, and it's all supply, demand, saltwater intrusion, direct potable reuse, taking it from drinking water. You know, Scott and I get there and we start talking about restoring wetlands, and people are like, "What? This is crazy. This is super interesting." true clean water services fashion. I love it. And so we've created this demand, this environmental demand for recycled water, which is very unique when you look at recycled water projects across the country. There's hurdles. Okay, there's no regulatory pathway to do this. Again, in true clean water services fashion, we're going to blaze this trail and work with our partner at DEQ. They are super interested in, super supportive of this. These rules, the IMD was written in 1991. It does not define the use of recycled water for beneficial ecological enhancement. So we are working closely with DEQ. They do have an allowance in their rules for a pilot study. That's what Thomas Dairy is. Okay, they're allowing us to do this pilot study where we are doing a lot of research. And what we're trying to define is the agronomic rate. Okay, the recycled water program is based on agronomic rate. If you look in the book right now, it's agronomic rate for corn is this, agronomic rate for wheat is this, and that's what dictates the amount of water you can irrigate. There is no agronomic rate for a diverse wetland plant community. That's what we're trying to define. Ultimately, that's what we need. They need a number that they know we're not driving it to the surface waters and we're not driving it to the groundwater. We're trying to keep the groundwater wet, moist, those plants happy and functioning and create all those benefits. But we're not just trying to pour it on there, okay? And we're looking at soils, groundwater, microbes, all sorts of fun stuff. We purchased Thomas Dairy in 2005. We started the irrigation program out there in 21. You can kind of see the difference there. We weren't doing a lot of irrigation in 21, but we just started working on putting it in the system. And we started kind of developing this study site. We're partnering with Portland State, Pacific University, Oregon State University. There's a lot of partners helping us on this research. So we developed this pilot study to define these beneficial uses in this agreement with DEQ. And the idea there is to study these 23 acres absolutely to death, get all this information, and that's going to clear the path for us to go do this same work at all those large sites. Davis, was it? I know all the names. Davis Tools, 170 acres, Jackson Bob's 140 acres, Zerker's 300 acres. These are large sites. We don't want to have to do that level of research in those large sites. We're going to get these questions answered here and then apply those at these other sites. And ideally, other utilities will kind of get on this bus and they will blaze the trail for them from a regulatory pathway perspective. So we're not only doing this for the good of the order, clean water services, but we're also doing this for the good of the orders of expanding reuse within the state of Oregon, because a lot of the rest of the state of Oregon really benefit from expanding their recycled water programs as well. Some of the active research we're doing out here and the dates in which we started them, the ones that are highlighted here, I'm going to pass my baton to Scott. Those are the ones he's going to really talk to tonight with you. But those are a list of some of the other things we're doing. One of the questions I have for you is, what are we missing? You know, what other research should we be doing out there would be a question that I would have for the team. Okay, I'm going to pass it off to Scott.
All right, thanks. I won't be super long. I know we'd probably rather be walking out than talking about it. But that was one of the benefits that was missing out there, is it created an awesome kind of lab for us to do research on and give people tours of. Anyway, it's a cool spot. So this is the aerial. The green here are where we now have groundwater wells dug out there, and where we are collecting samples from the groundwater, where we have sensors in the groundwater, and where we have soil moisture probes, and we're collecting soil moisture sensors. The red are from a previous year where we collected some PFAS samples. So you can kind of see the soil moisture types we have out here: the Cove clay, the McBee, silty clay, loam. And clay is, you know, this is the Tualatin Valley. There's clay. It's part of what makes this a wetland. But yeah, it means that water's not flowing very fast. It doesn't infiltrate very fast. So Jared mentioned part of this purpose is to make sure, like, when we irrigate out there, are we putting it enough that it's balanced by the evapotranspiration from the plants, so it's not getting down into the groundwater table or running off. And so we have out there at each of those locations, we have the soil moisture probe. That's a really cool probe. It's about 1.2 meters long, and it takes soil moisture measurements every 2 minutes at every 6 inches or so. And then soil temperature, even finer than that, every 4 inches. And so the 4 of these, we have a ton of data on the soil moisture, and it's kind of fun. You can watch the seasons change as
it rains and it's irrigated, watch the soil moistures kind of change from surface to bottom and watch the soil temperatures do the same. And we just installed a second one in each state. So now we have 8 soil moisture probes out there. And then in addition, you can see kind of my to scale technical drawing here of the well, about how far the soil moisture probe goes down. And then these wells are about 25 feet deep. And at the bottom, they have a water level, a conductivity, and temperature sensor. And so these also were taking measurements every 2 minutes. They're feeding up in that little tower thing, the data logger that has a solar panel and an antenna, and it's sending us the data in real time. So we can see how the groundwater, if it responds to when we have irrigation, we can see how it responds, how quickly to rainfall events. We can compare it with the water level of the Tualatin River and Fennel Creek nearby to kind of get an idea, is this, getting water from the river or putting water to the river? And so it's a valuable piece of information. So all the data, and I have like terrible, boring, complicated, long slides data that I didn't want to put anybody through. So I want to just keep it high level today. The takeaways are that the irrigation, when we start irrigating at the site, we don't see soil moisture increase at the site below about 24 inches. And so that is perfect. That's the outcome we were hoping for. There is one site that like wetted all the way down and stayed that way, has no daily cycle. And the longer it's out there, the more apparent it is that it must be cracked or something. But that's one of the reasons we put a second one out there. And we just did that, and now we just started irrigating, so we'll be able to get some better data at that site this year. Another kind of surprising thing, given the clay soils out here, is the groundwater responds pretty quickly. When it rains, the groundwater goes up. And we thought, the clay soils out here probably wouldn't. It does. And so that further speaks to, it's not just that there's no connection between the surface and the groundwater, it's that really that agronomic rate is pretty well dialed in, that it's not getting, it's not exceeding what the plants can evaporate. The other nice thing we saw is that the groundwater levels are always, even in the peakest part of the driest season, higher than the Tualatin River and the Fennel Creek. There's a very strong gradient of groundwater from north to south. And so we know we're not, it's not deep groundwater here that's never getting out of there. This is groundwater that's eventually going to the Tualatin River and Fennel Creek. Then, as you might expect, wet soil doesn't get as hot as dry soil does in the summer. And so the irrigation, compared to our one control plot that never gets irrigated, is much cooler. And so one of the other parameters we looked at here is PFAS. And so I presented on PFAS in March to this group. So you might remember me and a few other folks. And so this is part of a much larger PFAS study, but this is one of the things we want to know is, we know that there's PFAS in our effluent. So I want to know, so what happens to it when we put it out on the land? And are we causing the PFAS concentrations in the soil or groundwater to increase? And so we collect regular soil samples. It's kind of varied. Recently, it's gone a lot more frequent since we brought the PFAS lab in-house. And so we're collecting monthly now samples from the groundwater for PFAS, as well as from the surface at a 1 foot depth and 2 foot depth of the soils. And so we're getting representation from each of the soil types out there. And I mentioned, we have a bunch of other places we're collecting PFAS. So some of that is from Fennel Creek nearby, we've been collecting PFAS data there. We collect obviously what's coming out of the treatment plant that would be in the reuse water and also in the Tualatin River. And so we started in 2022 sampling once before we started irrigating, once in the middle of irrigation, and once at the end of the irrigation season. We did that again in 2023. Then this year we started sampling in March, about monthly, and we'll go through about October. And so this is the high level coverage of the data here. So the control site, furthest on the left here, never gets any irrigation. It's higher than the other sites. But you can see in each of these, the other three do get irrigated. So the furthest left piece on each of these panels is the groundwater, and the other are the soils at the surface, 1 foot and 2 foot depth. And so don't be too fooled by the units up here. The one is liquid, nanograms per liter, and the soil is nanograms per gram. So it's not like, anyway, but showing them both on one plot, we mixed units there. But the soil, you can see it's there,
It sticks around with the one exception of that, the one site two in the surface. It's, less than 5 nanograms per gram, and it's almost all PFAS. In fact, PFAS is the only one that's truly quantifiable out there. The only ones are estimates. And that number is pretty typical of what you see in soils worldwide. If you just, collect a soil sample from almost anywhere, 2-ish nanograms per gram is a pretty typical number for PFAS. It's kind of ubiquitous in the environment. In the groundwater, there's a lot more types of PFAS that are down there. But again, you can see it's as high. In fact, the highest one we have is the control site compared to the irrigated sites. The other thing is, this is a, summary of a whole bunch of data points, but there's no temporal trend at all. And so it doesn't increase over the irrigation season. It doesn't decrease during the wet season. It's kind of this just like underlying pretty steady concentration. You can see how small the error bars are on here. So that doesn't exactly lend itself to, showing that, well, that groundwater, that PFAS in that groundwater must be coming from the irrigation, because it's just as high or higher in ones that have never been irrigated. And so some of the things that we've, it's still a research project in progress, but we do know that PFAS is really the only one we're seeing in the soil. We know that typically it decreases with depth and there's no change in time, as I mentioned. And so this signature, I'm just gonna jump to this anyway. We're gonna have vegetation this season, but I'm gonna jump to this next slide. So this is looking at, on the right are the 4 groundwater wells. We've got a new color scheme because this was a different person that made it. It's prettier than the one I made. And the green is our Durham effluent. And on the orange is Rock Creek and Fano Creek, which are our 2 most urbanized creeks that we've been collecting samples from for a while now. And you can kind of see like the levels and the mixture of the PFAS look very similar across all 3 of these. And so trying to really understand where the ultimate source of the PFAS in the groundwater in Thomas Dairy, we really need to understand, well, what is the source that's in Fano and Durham? There's no firefighting foam things up there. There's no effluent. There's no airport nearby, at least for Fano. And so this kind of urban signature is something that we're really starting to research a lot now, we've been sampling upstream, trying to find, so where is this PFAS coming from? Because it appears that whatever it is pretty consistent throughout the basin. Along those lines, we've been starting several other studies to try to be able to source where the PFAS are coming from. And so one of the ways is to look at, well, there are compounds that are kind of specific to wastewater. And if they are ones that, are pretty mobile in the environment, don't just immediately stick to the soil, and they degrade, but not too fast. So you can tell if it's not from wastewater 20 years ago, or, you can't see it if it's more than a day old, then it's a good tracer. And so if you see that in a sample, it's an indicator that you've got fairly recent contribution from wastewater. And so some of these compounds, we've collected 3 samples now. There's about 40, 50 of them that we've had as like candidate compounds. Some of the most promising ones are sucralose, which fits all of those descriptions really well. It's always in wastewater, and it's very mobile, and it doesn't transform too fast, but it does eventually transform. And so we've collected samples from the groundwater from the sweetener. Caffeine is another one that's kind of specific to wastewater. And so far from each of those 4 wells, we have 3 samples, and we're just getting the data back now. And so it's still in analysis, so I don't have it to show for you yet, but it's ongoing. We also are starting a study with Jennifer Field at Oregon State out here. So in addition to the 40 PFAS that we measure using EPA's method in-house, she has an instrument where they can not quantify, but you can get a qualitative look at thousands of different PFAS. And so by using combinations of this, she's published papers on being able to find a fingerprint. So she can collect samples from AFFF foams and from landfill leachate and biosolids and wastewater, and then can look in samples, and using machine learning, she can look at all these combinations of these compounds and look at these fingerprints and tell you, well, this was the source of that PFAS or the relative contribution. So we are starting a study with her out in Thomas Dairy to do that with the groundwater, as well as Fano Creek and Rock Creek for that matter. And then the last question is, I don't know if these groundwater samples at Thomas Dairy are unusual or not. There's groundwater is kind of all over the place in the literature, depending on what land use it is. And so is this just what urban groundwater looks like at shallow depths? I don't know. And so I don't know if, we even can say that there is, that this is higher than it is anywhere else in the basin or even in rural or agricultural areas. And so that's the third part we're kind of doing here is we've been hunting wells, both public and private. We can get permission from, especially shallow ones, the 25 feet or so, that we can sample to kind of get a relationship of, well, is there a relationship between the land use and PFAS concentrations in the groundwater underneath it? And just kind of what is the PFAS in groundwater look like generally basin wide? So yeah, with that, this is more you maybe, but
Yeah, we're working on a master plan, really to try to further help us expand the program. And really trying to come up with a tool that they can look at different projects from a business case perspective. There's a value to 1 million gallons a day of reused water to clean our services. If we're trying to answer what is that number, which will really drive the decision for which projects.
Is there a value in the restoration work and as far as like mitigation credits, converting those to something that's marketable?
We have certainly considered the mitigation game. I think DSL and Army Corps probably would be reluctant to give mitigation credits when your hydrology source is not being natural. That's my guess. We sort of asked DSL that question. They politely said there's plenty of mitigation banking credits already in the 12 basin. So they didn't answer our question.
these are the questions that we had for you. I do want to, it is 8:10.
Yeah, so we're gonna go to Thomas Dairy. Let's go.
It's not a long walk.
No, we're pushing. But yeah, I think we did put these questions together, but I think clearly we're trying to provoke you guys to think about some of these questions. So those ones we came up with, but feel free to think about it. We can walk and talk. Maybe when we get down there, we could take your questions down there.
Maybe like,
Absolutely. We can, that'd be great, Alex. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Yeah, we'll just gather out where we ate dinner and then we'll head on down. Bye.
So, Sharon. Maybe